Welcome back to the Wonder Dip, the idea reactor, the exploratory linguistic playland. I like that idea that this show is to the spirit what the Dirty Donald's playland was to the 5-year-old Michael. Anyway, there's this concept I've talked about surely numerous times on the podcast at this point, an idea that I was made aware of by the great mythopoetic psychologist James Hillman, a notion that he calls growing down. And this hinges upon the idea that every person really does have a kind of interactive destiny if they are willing and courageous enough to boldly pursue it. So that's what they're growing down into, this possible better, if you will, version of themselves. Or I suppose Hillman would say something like their soul is growing down into its unique corporeal form in the same way a great tree would root itself down into the soil so it could grow into a majestic oak. This is a metaphor he uses in his fabulous book, Soul's Code, one of my favorites. Highly recommend you pick that one up if this line of mythopoetic musing tickles your wonder pickle. And of course, this is something we all aspire to do in our own way, but not many people honestly achieve. But I believe it is possible, and I believe you know it when you see it. And I bring it up because I think our guest in this mind meld, East Forest, is one of these people. He was definitely already doing his thing when we first connected, but now I think he's really come into his own. His creative output has been nonstop. His audience really seems to be responding because that's burgeoning in a huge way as well. And it's doing so for all the right reasons, which I think you'll see. If you're not familiar with East Forest, he is a sonic wizard, an acoustic alchemist. He makes music that is specifically crafted to enhance visionary experiences, but it's beautiful in its own right, regardless of what state of consciousness you happen to occupy. I, in particular, am really partial to his Music for Mushrooms album, one of my favorite things to meditate to or just throw on in the background while I work. East Forest also has a lovely pod of his own. It is called 10 Laws. I was actually just a guest on that recently, so check out that mind meld if you would like more after this one. This one was highly potent, in my humble opinion, if I do say so myself, particularly if you're struggling with vision in life, with directionality, with creative or spiritual matters. I really believe this podcast will balm up all of the above existential chafes, because it definitely did so for me. And with that, my friends, let us get into it. Definitely check out East Forest wherever you consume your music. Subscribe to his podcast, 10 Laws, and eastforest.org are the necessary keyboard mudras for all else on East Forest. And by the way, if you are digging these mind melds and you want to initiate yourself further, I've got just the thing to zest up your wonder nuggets. Patreon.com/third eye drops. It is both the best way to support the show and participate, as we've got a patron-only Discord server where we are musing all the time. We've got a patron-only book club, and I will send out technodelic trinkets like stickers, pins, shirts, and more, depending on your pledge level. We'll also be starting a new way to Wonder Dip called the Wonder Gym soon, where we will feature an expert guest. Perhaps someday East Forest will be one of them, where it will be both a live podcast and interactive endeavor. So again, all of that and more, patreon.com/third eye drops. You can also help us boost our signal by tickling the algorithms on our behalf wherever you listen to podcasts. I should mention we have over 300 audio-only podcasts available now wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple Pods, Spotify, whatever. Of course, I do so appreciate caressing that like and subscribe button here on YouTube. All of the above is, of course, appreciated, and it does help increase the circumference of our psychic splash. And with that, let us pierce the portal of this mind meld with the wise, wonderful East Forest. Great to have you. That was almost the first occasion where the deep breath almost evoked an involuntary burp, and that would have been a really odd, perhaps mirthful, trickstery way to start this podcast. So maybe we're in for some novel nuggets today, my friend. But first of all, so glad to have you back.
Yes, thank you. Good to be here, my friend. Yeah, it's not the cosmic giggle; it's the cosmic burp, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's as good of an ontology as I've heard lately. I mean, you think there must be some purpose, or it's like there's either purpose or there's no purpose. Rarely is it like, yeah, there is a purpose, and it's that God flatulated, or that you don't want to believe that you came from some uh bodily function of a higher being. That's not really a you're just like you're literally just like a sentient particle in the fart that is the universe or
That,
something.
that could be all it is, like an involuntary thing that was
Yeah.
trying to be held back, that somehow escaped an orifice of another universe, and here we are.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I was just listening to this book, A Life of Meaning by James Hollis, the depth psychologist, and there's some quote or passage where he's talking about you know no one wants to believe the universe is simply an algorithmic process. Like nobody wants to believe that it's just so,
mm.
it's constituted of these completely impersonal rules that allow it to exist, but other than that you're an absolute fucking orphan. Like that's a really difficult thing to deal with.
But why can't it be that the mathematical complexity in itself is God manifest? I mean, to me, if psychedelic experiences have shown me any small things, it's that this level of design and interconnectivity is so beyond anything we could ever like computate, that in itself is the beauty. It's the soul itself. So I don't have a problem with like kind of crunching things down, because to me it's like
Mhm.
you're just looking at the amazingness that uh, of kind of how things work, how the sausage is made.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the deist perspective, I guess, is that it allows for some level of teleology, but it's also not like a personal god
Mm.
that's watching out for you, that's setting things up for you. And what's interesting is I've actually heard some hardcore physicists arguing for this recently, like not ones who have any particular spiritual agenda or are coming from some kind of like dubious wooey angle, but that they really like this is what the mathematical complexity that you're alluding to actually points toward in their mind. The guy's name escapes me right now, but I think he's connected to the Santa Fe Institute. He has some new book out, and his argument is essentially that consciousness as a force is real in the universe, but not in a panpsychist way where consciousness is fundamental, but that the universe is birthing consciousness, that it's kind of a uh, like a nursery for
Mm.
consciousness in a way, and that it's evolving alongside the universe. And one of his arguments, which is something that I guess Einstein also argued for, is that tuning, what they call tuning, is evidence of some kind of uh, teleology or intelligence. Because have you ever heard of this tuning argument before?
And of course, maybe not, but when you say that, I'm thinking about what it means in music, which is math. But I don't know if it's
Yeah,
related.
No, it is. It for sure is, because it's kind of like in the same way as if you have a guitar where one string is out of tune, it's going to be super dissonant and just ruin the melody, right? And it's the same thing with the fundamental laws of physics. Like you have the weak force, the strong force, nuclear
Allegedly,
force,
yeah.
whatever, right? And physicists point out that if any of these forces were infinitesimally different, we wouldn't exist. Not only would we not exist, like the sun would burn out, planets wouldn't stay in orbit. There's all of these things that are seem to be just so if you're looking at all of the features of reality in an unbiased way. How can you dismiss that as mere chance? It's very difficult to do.
I've heard the analogy that the odds of all of this being, um, it's the same like odds as if we threw all the constituent parts of a 747 in the
Yeah.
air and having it come together. But I also like another like analogy made about a Rubik's cube. If you give it to a blind person and if they're just randomly working on it, how long it would take? It's some
Uh-huh.
insane amount of years. Versus if you just give them one cue, not necessarily yes and no, but just one cue, it can be done in minutes. You know.
Interesting.
So if there's a
Interesting.
kind of feedback, which I very much believe we are in the midst of constantly experiencing, sort of ripples coming back at us that are the result of the decisions, in essence, that we make, cause and effect. When you start to learn how to listen to that feedback, that's where that tuning, where that resonance can come a bit more into play. That's the conversation of life. I mean, that when you talked about this consciousness being birthed in tandem, in a sense, I mean, all I could think about was like, isn't that what we are? I mean, this you're talking to me about what I would see as the soul's journey
Hmm.
is this rising consciousness that's growing and understanding itself in as it evolves.
Yeah. Yeah, it does make sense. It's funny how I have this I don't know if it's an issue, but I'm the type of person who I'm very I'm not going to say I'm easily swayed, because I do think I have a nose for bullshit, but if I like something, like if it's
You want to
music,
believe. Yeah, I
yeah,
hear you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, not if it's a theory, if it's a style, if it's a music, because like I grew up playing music and stuff. I'd be like, "Oh yeah, this is exactly the kind of music I want to play. This is exactly the kind of music I want to make." And then all of a
Totally.
sudden, like a great, like, I don't know, like a great hip hop song comes on. I'm like, damn, maybe I miss my calling as a, clearly I must, look at my
That
aesthetic. I clearly miss my
that happens to me
calling
all the
as a,
time. All the
yeah,
time. I
yeah.
get inspired by a kind of music and it's like so different than the last. And yeah. And I'm like, I want to make a music like that.
You got hip hop EP coming out.
I mean, I've dropped a few like hip hop y songs. There's on the Ramdas record, there's a song that I would say it's kind of like Gorillas. It's got
Oh, nice.
beats like that. And we worked with Stick of Dead Prez, and it's got some good hip hop
Oh,
credentials
that's
on there.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I didn't know that.
So
Um,
there's a few other tracks like that. So I definitely get to dip my feet in at times.
yeah.
I mean, trust me, it won't be me rapping.
That's what I
The
want,
times
though.
where I
I
have
mean,
done it, I
yeah.
like making beats, but usually when it comes to the spit and rhymes, I leave that to somebody else.
I do want to get back on the more ontological wiggly woo, because why not? But also, have you ever just wanted to, because this is another thing I fantasize about, is do you ever just fantasize about releasing something and being totally anonymous? Or like being
Yes.
one of those EDM guys that like wears a crazy mask or something like that?
Well, both for different reasons. I do fantasize about like side projects of things like, I mean, anything from country music to,
Hmm.
um, you know, hardcore techno. Even
Yeah,
though I
yeah.
feel like I could almost pull that off with East
You could.
Forest, but
Yeah.
the mask thing is interesting to me because then I feel like I wouldn't actually have to tour. I could hire someone else to do it. Because anytime I see Daft Punk, I'm like, I mean, it could be anybody. You know,
That's true.
they made the music. I get it, but I mean, we're accepting the notion that it's sort of like the personality is gone
Yeah.
from the performance. There's no talking, you know. So,
You you
of
need
course, I
some.
fantasize about not
Yeah.
having to be on an airplane or driving through traffic, or the whole hurry up and wait game.
You need a DJ demiurge. You need just like
Yeah.
like a lesser. This sounds so mean, but it like a lesser version of yourself that you just send out to sort of like
Yeah.
do your agency upon the world.
Oh, dude,
What?
I get so jealous of DJs. I have friends who are DJs, and they show up at gigs with a thumb drive. I mean,
Yeah,
I have 150, 200 pounds of gear that I haul around the world, and it's a constant struggle of,
yeah.
can I fit it in that size of an Uber? And then I don't want to leave it in the car when we go to this restaurant. So now we have to go put it somewhere. We're like, well, we can't go in there because the gear, and beyond, you have to do the sound checks and setting it up. I just love this idea of you just like pop in a thumb drive within minutes and you're performing. It. I, I mean, I don't do it for particular reasons, but I am jealous that that's even a thing.
Oh, believe me, I know, man. Like I said, I grew up playing music too, and I was, came up in what is essentially like the punk indie scene, and just hauling around like half stacks and 8x10s
Yeah,
and shit.
exactly.
It's like it's so thankless. Half the time you're playing to like five people, and you're just like, what are we doing? Um, but going back to where all of this started with the conversation about meaning or lack thereof in the fabric of the universe. um I'm listening to an odd arrangement of books right now. One is this book called Braiding Sweet Grass, and I
Hmm.
mentioned the other one too. Are you familiar with that one?
I am, but it's been long enough that I don't even remember a lot of it. But that's a classic.
Yeah, yeah. So it's written by this botanist who is also an indigenous person, and I don't remember. Maybe Potawatomi. Don't quote me on that, but um, it's an interesting mashup because on one hand, I'm listening to this depth psychologist talk about trying to live a life of meaning, and I'm listening to this indigenous person also talk about trying to live a life of meaning, and kind of marry the mundane scientific with the magical,
Right.
that is of their native lineage. And I'm sure I've talked to you about this before, and I've talked about it on the podcast a lot, is that this phenomenon of what I've been calling mythopoetic drift, how we're sort of losing uh, our mythological substructure and our metaphorical way of making sense of the world. And in doing that, you just kind of find yourself in this place of there is no, in a sort of like Nietzschean God is dead like scenario, where you don't have a true north concept anymore. You don't have like a rock to make sense of the world by. And I was saying to you before I hit record that there were a few quotes that just were mind blowing to me when I was on this walk earlier listening to this book. And one of them is a quote by Jung to the effect of what I'm talking about, and it's, the modern fell off the roof of the medieval cathedral into the abyss of the self. The
That sums
mo-
up our times today. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, the
Hmm.
modern fell off the roof of the medieval cathedral into the abyss of the self. And my jaw like opened up when I heard that quote, man, because
Yeah.
that's what it feels like. It feels like we've done a psychic high dive off the last vestige of meaning, and we're all sort of just grasping through the abyss right now or something to try to make
Mm.
sense of reality, whether it's through physics like we were talking about, or it's through revivifying some kind of ancient philosophy, or it's through having primary experiences like with psychedelics or whatever. um not that there's an answer there, but I feel like that's just such a good description of where we're at.
We are in this techno haze. So we are in a fog that indeed is a kind of abyss that we've created ourselves. But it could be viewed perhaps that it's an inevitable process of our own growth. Like, you have to know what is not to know what is. We have to be lost in order to go to the next step. And We have to destroy that which we didn't realize how much we loved in order to, in effect, have to rebuild it
Mm.
and create that new future. I just hope that the bottom isn't so deep that we can't dig ourselves out of it. It certainly feels that way, but it does. Do you get the sense that there's an inevitability to this entire process going way back, to the technology of agriculture all the way till
Mm-hmm.
now? And as McKenna would describe, it's concrescence. It's acceleration that it's easy to feel and see. It's not really. That's kind of a fact that things are speeding up that way, and maybe we even experience time as moving faster and faster. But in that, uh, each individual ultimately has to choose, how they want to connect to reality. And I
Yeah.
think that's what people are waking up to slowly, is that it really is only up to them in the end. And so
Mm.
this feeling of being lost is the only people who can help you be found is yourself. And I think we've been trusting in institutions and a top-down mentality for so long that that's what's breaking down essentially. And what's rising from those ashes is the self. Hopefully, in a recognition of our interdependence and more of this collective us as opposed to just the individual being isolated. But ironically, in the top-down model, you feel more isolated as an individual. And from the bottom up model, when you come from the inside out, it usually leads towards a recognition of our interdependence, interspecies,
Mm-hmm.
cross cultural.
Can you explain more what you mean by the bottom up?
Yeah, like it's sort of a soul centric individual, like a self healing model. And
Mm.
that, we start to realize that when you heal from the inside out, the choices that you make from the inside out, which is how all change happens anyway. We just have this illusion that it's from the outside in, it's from the top down. Like big structures and governments make decisions. And
Yeah.
but those started from individuals transforming and changing their own ideas and then coming together as groups and making policy.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, it always starts from the bottom up, from one person at a time in the interior of your own heart. As Ram Dass said in that last song I released with John Hopkins, he says the real work that we do is in the privacy of our own hearts.
Mm.
And to me, that really rings true because, you kind of know, like, despite all of your external forms in your life, that inner life you have that only you know, where you're this protagonist in your own journey and conversation in your head, and then the things you feel in your heart. I think that is actually the most real thing that you have, that you
Yeah.
experience. And in many ways, that even if you've been tossing it aside your entire life, there's a part of you that feels like actually that really matters.
Mm-hmm.
How I feel on the inside and how I sort of think and the decisions and choices I make. And I think you start to recognize as you awaken to that power, that then you actually, as we were talking about earlier in this conversation, those choices become a kind of conversation with the world. And it's not that you're just directly manifesting your reality, like the choice or the miracle, I think it's what it's called. These sorts of things we talk about. It's more that you're part of it, though. Like you're throwing your choices of stone into the lake that causes those ripples, and they're
Yeah.
needed. Is what I'm trying to get at. It's like your participation in that is needed, because it's
Oh
almost like
yeah.
things are coming at you, and we're abdicating all of our choice over to external powers to say, well,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm just this isolated being. What am I supposed to do? And that is a very nihilistic way of that is it is sort of that Nietzschean viewpoint of like there's nothing left, there's no meaning. But that is the structures themselves. We've put our idea of God into technology, into science, into
Yeah. Oh
achievement and
man.
buildings.
Yeah.
That is what, in a sense, is
You're honing in
breaking
on.
down.
Yeah. You're honing in on something so big. You're honing in on something so big, and this is another huge Jungian riff that really just the first time I heard it, like made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck, and just like everything inside of me was screaming yes, yes. And it's this idea that the gods are not dead. What actually happened is the vessels that used to hold that archetypal energy have withered away and broken down, so that now that energy has seeped out into the world. It's seeped out into your body, into your psyche especially. And now our new names, I don't remember this exact quote by Jung, but our new names for the gods are neuroses, are pathologies, are, you don't say Aphrodite has left me anymore. You say, I don't have a sexual libido, or I have some kind of trauma blocking my, like, none of it has changed literally. It's all changed contextually, the way we make sense of it, the way we think about it. And this is this abyss that I think he was talking about, this high dive off of the medieval cathedral into the
Mm.
abyss of the self. It's like we're still the same psychically, but the way we make sense of the world has been quote unquote disproven. The quote unquote gods have died because we don't appreciate the metaphorical truth of it anymore. We don't appreciate the fact that metaphor is actually a, a an entryway, a portal to understanding. This is another great quote I heard recently, that I'm not going to be able to remember, but it's something to the effect of that. I may have even posted this earlier, but I've just been like listening to and watching and reading so much shit that I forget. But it's something to the effect of that, um, metaphor is a kind of truth that we've lost touch with because we're too obsessed with analytical truth.
Oh yeah.
Metaphorical truth isn't truth anymore unless you can weigh it, unless you can show it on a scale, unless you can prove it in an equation. But then, to deny that there are things beyond that analytical realm, you know, none of us can deny that. Like, have you ever weighed your love on a scale? Have you ever, like, uh weighed the way that you feel when somebody does something selfless on a scale? Of course not. But yet they're there, yet they're powerful, yet they can, like, literally, like, these ephemeral things we call ideas can mobilize millions of people under a single cause. It's something that's still there that we're losing our fluency with. And I think that that is actually kind of a dangerous thing too, because if you lose your fluency there and someone does hold a little fluency, that's essentially a form of magical control, or a form of, like, manipulation at the very least, that you can exercise over people. um yeah, I'll digress from there because I'm sure you've got some
I,
riffs welling up.
I would say that the only way to work with and understand the universe and what all this is through myth and metaphor.
Yes.
Materialism has almost by its nature a glass ceiling, and it's been known we've lost these truths. I mean, Zen, for instance, a koan is like these are ways of describing and understanding the nature of reality by creating paradoxes that
Hmm. Hmm.
stop the gears of the mind, because then that is the doorway into the numinous. By stop, you don't think about it, you feel it, you dance around it, in a sense is the only way, because it has nothing you can put your finger on. It's like a black hole or something.
Oh yeah.
There's a boundary condition there we will never be able to cross, but we can sing with it, we can harmonize with it, we can pray to it, we can celebrate it, but it is the ineffable, and that's actually why it makes our life so rich. Because imagine if none of that existed and everything was actually in a box, containable. it, there would then you truly have a no God life. God
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
essentially our attempt at describing and being in touch with that which you can't touch. I mean, that is what
Yeah.
makes it rich.
Yeah.
So music and art and humor and all the things that kind of make us the most human, that's the meat of the pie. And so it
Yeah.
just always cracks me up that I don't, even if we could measure what chemical reaction is creating how much love, I'm sure it wouldn't change to me anything. It's like, well, that's
Yeah.
just the machine. I'm in a spacesuit, and yes, there are all these wonderful chemical reactions. What an amazing spacesuit that helped me translate sort of multi-dimensional things into this three-dimensional reality. I'm this kind of conduit where I can transmit all these different feelings beyond, this dimensional
Hmm.
space. Which, how cool is that? Like, that's,
Totally.
what
Yeah.
we are as humans. We get to live in multiple places at once and feel cosmic consciousness and be animals and physical beings at the same time. Never said that would be easy. That sounds
Right.
like a very difficult
Yeah.
thing to do, but
Yeah.
that's what we are.
I sense that too, man. I feel a lot of truth in that statement. And I think too, it's too often that we're tempted to pit these two ways of thinking against each other. Like, this is one of the classic dichotomies in philosophy. It's like the rational versus the analytical. The analytical says, no, what's real is what we can weigh and measure. The rational says, no, what's real is what we process in our mind. It's the truth that we come to through rational inner processes. But to me, they absolutely have the capacity to complement one another. And if you look at people who have walked both paths and they've used the analytical as a portal into the rational, into what could be called the spiritual, that to me is what I'm so attracted to. That's why I'm attracted to Jung. That's why I really like this Braiding Sweetgrass book, as a woman who is a botany professor but also indigenous, and it used that analytical knowledge as a botanist to understand the wonder of the natural world more deeply. And people like Plato, Dr. Lisa Miller, there are all
Einstein.
these people.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there are all these people who I, uh, I got to mention, shout out to Dr. Donald Hoffman too. There's all these people who have the ability to. You ever notice these scientific geniuses who are clearly very intelligent, who it almost seems like they're using their knowledge as a security blanket against the unknown. Like, they're trying to insulate themselves against the mystery as like a way to hold on to something. Like, maybe that's another effect of this plunging into the abyss off the top of the cathedral, is you want to grab something solid. Like,
Oh
let me
yeah.
grab the first fucking hard branch that sticks out in hopes that this will be my savior. Like, that's what it feels like sometimes. But then there are these people, again, like the whole list of people. Goethe, I got to mention Goethe. He's one of the greats when it comes to this. Is who find a way to merge those two things. And to me, that feels like the most nuclear hot, almost like they're almost close to constructing the philosopher's stone or something like that.
That's really, to me, what's so great about art, because by its nature, you're combining in skill and maybe technique, things that are very pedestrian and tangible, that somehow then, like, that proficiency is what creates this doorway for things of great meaning to come through that speak to larger memes and feelings. That, I mean, that's why art is so amazing when it's done the best. And the fact that, like, it's infinite in its forms and even comes into this world of, like, our own taste, is fascinating. Like, and that it speaks to us in different ways. Different. It's not even universal from what. That's
Hmm.
crazy, isn't it? Like, that there's
Yeah.
no such thing as, like, we've never created a work of art that everybody likes, even no
Yeah,
matter how
yeah,
great it is. Like, there are plenty of people who still look at certain things and be like, I think that's crap. It does nothing for me. Where others, it's totally transcendent.
totally.
So I it again, it seems like baked in to what it means to be human. It's natural to want to grasp onto something and feel like you understand it. Most doctors that I've met are that way. Not all, but they feel like, I'll grasp onto this, and boy, is it a world that is very complex. But then they have this hubris to think, I we get it all, when
Yeah.
it's hard to say, like, you know some things, but there's a lot you don't know. It really is. And then live in that space to give life or death advice. I mean, I don't envy those people who have to do that, but um, it's a powerful dance to want to be in between spaces like that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think one way to like marry this with practicality is that if you cut to the chase of what somebody like Young was proposing, other than like, yeah, we're just in this abyss of the self now, like what he was really proposing was his model of individuation, where it's this model of wholeness, it's this model of radical honesty, it's this model of having done really deep inner exploration and knowledge acquisition, where you do have to do this period of knowledge acquisition outside in the world. Most people do this at a young age, where they're educating themselves, they're working in a career, they're becoming knowledgeable in like the mundane aspects of something, and then they go back inward and they start looking for that inner knowledge. And for like Young, he was an awesome artist. Like I
Yeah,
love,
yeah,
have you ever see his like book in the red book, or his art in the
yeah,
red book? Yeah. And he got so into myth, he got so into like yoga later in life, he got so into the concept of mandalas being like one of the best symbols for depicting the soul or reality or something. I don't remember the exact um, language he used, but essentially, you can also draw a direct line from that into Campbell's obsession with the hero's journey and following your bliss as an individual being. Following the thing that feels like it's calling to your soul, and trusting that and going toward that. And for most people, that's a fantasy, that's a dream, that's something that they want to do but are afraid to like take the plunge toward. And this is something I really wanted to ask you, and I was alluding to it at the end of the podcast we did for your show last week, where I said I wanted to bounce something off of you. Is, to most people, you have taken that plunge, you have been successful in that plunge of going toward that thing that your heart was like aching for, and now you're successful in it. You're personally successful, you're probably a modicum of financially successful, you have the respect of your peers. Has arriving at that, though I'm sure there's in many ways you don't feel like you've quote unquote arrived, but to the from the outside looking in, has arriving at that given you a measure of that kind of deep satisfaction? Or do you feel like, no, I still don't have it, I still don't,
mm.
I'm still searching? Um, I, I'm so curious how you feel about that.
Well, it's kind of you to say, reflecting from the outside in. I mean, just the first point you were talking about following your bliss. Earlier we were talking about the abyss we're in and not
Mm-hmm.
having a North Star. I mean, that is the North Star if anyone's looking for one. And I know it's not a myth, or it's not like a fallacy, or what did you call it? It's not something they don't have. It's just,
Hmm.
I mean, it's like play with it. Like if bliss isn't the right word for you, like what excites you,
Yeah.
even moment to moment, like really start to play with it almost scientifically and say, like, see what happens.
Yes.
Maybe say I'll take to the next hour or the next 3 days or for 3 weeks. Fuck it. I'll just see what happens if I use that as my North Star, not knowing even what fully that means. Because that absolutely is a language of the soul, is speaking to you through excitement, little flickers of that's interesting to me. I don't know why. Even the things you think, you forget about the economy of scale, like things that feel mundane. Like I would love to bake those cookies. I really want to bake cookies right now. I haven't done that in a long time. Or I'm gonna write in a journal. I don't know. It just feels a little exciting. Like right now, it feels exciting. It's like when I feel like I want to take a nap. I've learned, do it immediately. If I put it off, I won't be able to fall asleep. If you have that feeling, it's like, okay, take a nap. Do a 15-minute nap. I think it's the same thing. It's like follow your bliss, but also as soon as you can, like,
Yeah.
and in
Yeah.
small ways. It doesn't have to be these huge, like, I will change careers. It's like, no, 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 no. Like, I'm just feeling like I want to take a few deep breaths for
Yeah.
a couple seconds. Oh, I just really want
Yeah.
to take it. I just want to take a beat. Whew,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds
Mm-hmm.
exciting to me. Is taking a beat.
Mm-hmm.
So just wanted to say that. Um, your second question, I I was at this lunch the other day for a stepdaughter's graduation, and we were at this restaurant that a friend of ours owns and built, and he's a very successful consultant, big Republican in Boise, good guy, very different political viewpoints than myself. But he said to me, he does private yoga with my partner Rada, and he he's like, yeah, I've been hearing all about you're so successful. How's that feel? And I was like, what do you what do you I don't know, what are you hearing? Like, and I thought about it for a second, and he's like, yeah, how's it feel? Do you feel like you've plateaued? Like you've hit that? Do you feel like you've hit that plateau? And the term plateau to me felt like
Yeah.
pejorative,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
was like, oh, no. But I thought about it for a second because he's very successful in his world. He's a
Hmm.
consultant, and he's like, yeah, I feel like for myself, he said, it's so much work to get to that plateau, but once you're there, it feels really good because then you're kind of just doing your thing, and you're in fifth gear, so to speak.
Hmm.
I was like, okay, I can understand that. I was like, on one level, I've put in 15 years of
Yeah.
work on this project, and before that, there was another, gosh, I don't know, 10 some years with my other projects. And before that was like all the schooling I did where I was pursuing sort of a similar path, but not exactly the same. So it's just been this like nonstop hustling that's really based out of my own fears and
Right.
complexes about all sorts of things, anything from self-worth to not wanting to turn into my parents to wanting affirmation from external things. Or but there was also this inside it, there was a big shift in me when I started this whole East Forest thing, and it started without even like starting something. Like, started out of my own psychedelic revelation and crumbling of everything else I was doing, and it came out of that space where my North Star, which I actually, it's funny you asked me this because just yesterday I was thinking about this in a real deep way. And I was like, I always have to check in with myself about what is that North Star,
Yeah.
because I get real wrapped up in lately. Um, Logistics stuff gets me super stressed out. Some business stuff that's been going on has been quite stressful. Like, I haven't been able to wrangle much of anything. Everything's just like, that's not quite how I wanted it to be. And this person I feel like is trying to take advantage of us. And this person has
Yeah.
complaining about such and such issue. And I wish that wasn't the case. And I'm just like, why am I doing this? And way back when I was like, it's still because I want to connect people to what I call their soul. Why do I want to do that? Because that was important to me. That was so revelatory to me to change my entire worldview of like, it's not just meaningless nihilism. It is hard, but it has meaning. And I can't explain to you what that meaning is, but I can write songs about it. I can have conversations around it. We can have experiences and share space
Yes.
together that start to illuminate it. And it's us sitting around the fire, as Ram Dass said, or it's
Yeah.
us singing together, and that's all there is to do. And so I just like to remind myself about whatever is happening externally. That's what I'm in the business of, because it helps. That's what I'm in the business of personally. Like, I want to continually remember of what's really important to me and what really has value to me. So I have a lot more that I want to do, and a lot more things that I think would be fun and interesting and blissful to create, that I also think would be powerful experiences for people to continue this dance and this conversation. And that feels like an act of service to me. And I try not to get too wrapped up in the numbers of it, so to speak, because we live in a world that's hyper quantified, and you can feel, I don't like to compare myself. I mean, it's a natural thing for us too, but I hate, it feels shitty every time
Yeah.
that's why I'm not on social media personally, because I feel
Oh, you're
bad.
not. I didn't know that.
I have Miranda helps me. Like I give her content, and I'm on my page, like to see my world, like if it interact with people. But I don't see
I
other
see.
people's.
Okay.
I don't do the feed because it really brought me down, and that's
Hmm.
been years that I just not. I'm not able to. It's like I'm not strong enough to live in that
That's
world
smart.
of
That
comparison.
that's smart. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people aren't able to admit that it pulls them into a well of damaging self comparison. It's really difficult to not go down that road. I mean, I go down that road every day. I mean, it doesn't it hasn't gotten me off of social media longer term, but I probably should. I'm probably way overdue for a social media fast.
I mean that's a subject that I feel very strongly about in that um like we're not going to find God in social media, and I think we try. I know that
Ooh,
sounds kind of
yeah.
ridiculous, but
No, I
we do
completely
because we
understand
put
what you're
so
saying.
much
Yeah.
energy into that. And what is it? It's it's a manufactured form of connection which we are yearning for, but you get it in a way through that's on one level endless. So it's actually sucking energy out of you because it's too much. It's too much
Mhm,
dopamine. It's
mhm.
too much information. But it's also so saccharine that it's not the thing you're actually looking for. That's like when you want sugar, but you really need food. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, the only it's not even counter to what you're saying. It's just what to me feels like a useful addendum is that much like your music, people can choose to be something of an oasis in a sea of the saccharine, vacuous garbage. Like you can choose to be like, you know what? I'm not going to put out anything that is putting other groups of people down. I'm not going to put out anything that's critical. I'm going to put out stuff that's fun and thought provoking and, creative and maybe funny or something. And other than that, I'm not going to weigh in on, the bullshit. I'm not going to pander. I'm not going to create clickbait. And I think that I've talked about this with other podcasters before, that in this hyper quantified world, it's funny because in some ways, a number is a number, right? One download is one download. But with your music, just comparing like music for mushrooms or something with like a Drake song, there's like something fundamentally not equal there, and it's funny because I even notice it in myself, man, because it's like I'm listening to my release radar on Spotify, and then an East Forest song comes on, and I'm like, I'm not
Hmm.
prepared for this right now. Like I'm not prepared for an East Forest song right now. Like
It takes a little vulnerability,
yeah,
indeed, I
yeah,
think, to
yeah.
get uh, the full breadth out of it. But I, y- you're right that a million spins versus one spin that's really helps someone. Like I got a letter. So I put my PO box on my website. I don't know, a while back because I was like, well, that seems pretty safe. It's like if you really want to mail something, that's the way to do it. So every time I get back into town here, there's usually like one thing, and I got this amazing letter from this guy who's talking about how he and his brother went on a journey together with psilocybin, and they took way too much, and it was going real,
Perfect.
real sideways. Yeah. And his brother was really struggling. And somehow, like in the middle of all that, he remembered the album Music for Mushrooms, and somehow he hit play on it. And he said it took their journey to a space where not only to become completely more blissful, but deeply, deeply powerful for them. And he felt like his words, not mine, is that it saved his life. And I've been there, you know. I know what that turnaround can feel like, and the role music can play in that. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
not me turning him around, but it's the thing that can turn us all around. And the fact that that can happen, just that one happening, it's worth it to create that, just for the
Mhm,
compassion I have for
mhm.
another human being in that space. So in many ways, releasing a 5-hour album like Music for Mushrooms was the kryptonite to our hyperspeed, digitized,
Yeah.
quantified world, because literally what everyone else was doing at that time is making songs as short as possible,
Right.
because then you have more spins, more money. This was the opposite, songs that were 30 minutes long. That's not industry friendly. But I
No,
just felt like this, in some ways, it's a counter current that
totally.
is needed. Not that everything has to be that way, but it's sort of creating pause in our lives,
Hmm.
which I know. And again, these are all medicines that are coming from my own needs, where I'm just as plugged in as everybody else. And even though, yeah, I'm down here in southern Utah right now, and I find ways to create as much expansiveness as I can. I'm no monk, like I have an iPhone, and I might not be scrolling through feeds on certain platforms, but I still see Instagram. I still want to open it a lot, and even just to look at my own, my like who's written a message. Even that, I can feel the drug. So it's very, very powerful. Like the force
Hmm.
is pulling at our attention these days. It's unbelievably deft. So
Yeah.
I sympathize, and I think anything we can do to remind ourselves and connect back into our humanness and
Yeah.
nature and our natural
Yes, yes, yes,
cycles
yes.
is really nourishing for all of us.
I'm so glad you're going there, because that's another thing I was thinking a lot about today with that Braiding Sweet Grass book is, this indigenous woman spending, I think it's a woman, the narrator's a woman. So I'm not even sure if the author's a woman. I'm not even sure if it's the author reading the
Mhm.
book now that I say that, or if it's an actor. But um, she, the person who is reading this, talks so much about contextualizing yourself within nature. Like if you're in it, if you're around it, if you're finding food provided by it, you innately contextualize yourself within nature, because that's physically where you are. That's energetically where you are. We are not there. We are in this weird simulacrum bubble of comfort and ideas. And that's what we contextualize ourselves by, is these extraordinarily shaky concepts, hierarchy of egos, hierarchy of ideas. And I would even put hierarchy in air quotes, because what makes something better? How much money it makes, how many numbers it gathers, to use, what we were talking about before as an example. Even those metrics clearly are missing something. They're not foolproof, in the same way only looking at the world through these analytical measurements, like we were
Mhm.
talking about before, is not foolproof and will not yield soul quenching answers. So when all you have to contextualize yourself is these weird ideas, you're not in a very good place. Like you're in a very hollow place, where really the undercurrent of everything is what we all know to be uh clichely unsatisfying, which is money, right? Everyone knows that that's not going to make you happy. Everyone knows having however many numbers isn't going to make you happy, but we all pretend that, well, I might as well just keep chasing that in the meantime, right? I might as well
Mhm.
just keep chasing the thing that I know is not going to make me happy, but I have to do because of all societal pressures, and I guess existential pressures is forcing me to do. And that's why I think what you do, man, is so special, because you're creating an avenue for people to recontextualize themselves in the scheme of more than just these vacuous ideas, and the scheme of more than just the rat race, the chasing the fucking trophy of whatever kind. And there's not that many avenues to do that, man. And I think that, again, this is why I think developing a little bit of mythological fluency is so important, because when you come away with these experiences, you'll have more metaphors at your disposal to make sense of them through, because we don't
Mm.
have good ones. And I think when you don't have good ones, that contributes to this sort of commodification of psychedelics that we see. That contributes to the sort of changing the profound experience you just had back into another egoic feature, you know, back into another like object that you can flaunt or something like that. And man, it's just so important to have not only an avenue for these experiences, but also a way to translate them in a way that feels medicinal and feels like there's some depth there. And I think myth and spirituality provides an opportunity for that in the best of cases. It's so tricky too, because it's all that's also where bypassing comes from, right? It's like is that same thing misused. um how have you avoided that? How have you noticed yourself being tempted by that and then having to recalculate? Because you're in this space where you are facilitating that. You yourself are going on these journeys often, or at least occasionally, as you've told me. And I know that you have your proclivities spiritually. I know that you're highly pulled into the what was the formerly, I guess still is the Ram Dass community, and um the Neem Karoli Baba community, if I said that correctly. Um, but yeah, please riff.
Yeah. When I'm saying like connecting people to their soul, it's what you're speaking to. It's just another way of saying it's not religious. It's just the most human. It's completely universal in that it's sort of cutting through the bullshit to say, hey, isn't there more here? Like, what are you really feeling? Or it's not about the bypassing comes from avoiding usually the situation that's actually happening, or the materialness of it in a way, our relations. And in many ways, that's where the real work is done. That's the curriculum of this school that we're there, that we call life, is working with our traumas, is working with the stuff that comes up with our families, is our relations, probably more than anything. It's just like, look around at your relations, your partners, your family, your friends, your work relationships, your communities beyond that, these circles within circles with your soul at the center, emanating outward, like how you treat yourself in your mind. Um, that's the work, again, in the privacy of your own heart. That is the work. And it's meant to be fantastic, messy, and have ups and downs. I would say if you feel like you're working through things and facing a lot of challenges, I'd say good job. Like you're not avoiding life. Like it's supposed, the friction of things is the point of being here. It gives us an opportunity to make choices, to understand different sides of things, and to learn and to grow. And that's, I think we might have talked about this when we were talking before about the great cosmic game of peekaboo. It was
Yeah.
like a way of describing what's happening, in that God itself, or all that is, creates all that is not, so that it can discover itself in sort of a remembering, almost like the way when we play peekaboo with a baby. The joy in that, the pure, uh, unbridled joy of remembering what you had forgotten, that always has been there, that is gracing
Hmm.
you without you having to earn it. It's about taking things off as opposed to putting things on. And I think as people start to recognize that this idea of enlightenment is more something that's what you are, and that you fall into and fall out of, and that it's not something you have to beat yourself up about. It's like, it's who you are. It's what we are. It's what this is.
Totally.
That's a pretty amazing feeling. And then to try and mirror that, or I should say, put it in the same basket as all the horrors going on. I mean, talk about a rich experience. Uh, that's why creativity, and again, myth as you're saying it, or art as I'm saying it, are
Hmm.
all ways to um, keep it moving,
Yeah.
like to massage it, manipulate it, so it's not stale, static, and staid. It's actually quite vibrant, alive, and you are surfing with it. Like you are helping churn the yin yang energetic flow of the universe by gyrating through your own stuff and not avoiding it by feeling it. Just
Yes.
feeling it is everything. We avoid so much feeling. I mean, that's a lot of what our distractive elements of social media and intoxication. We're essentially pushing another kind of feeling away, and a lot of the healing, on whatever timeline you choose to do it, is really just about the honorable action of just feeling, and how
Yeah.
out of
Yeah.
touch we are with even just our own bodies, and not just feeling with our minds. Like I'm having these crazy thoughts, but it's like, but what does that feel like in your body? What is a
Yeah.
somatic experience of that? So being human is not like we find the answer. It's like now we figured out how to escape. Uh, like the Eightfold Path, for instance, is more just about helping you lower your suffering and work with what it means to be a human being. And the answer is that there is no answer. And I know that sounds absolutely infuriating and ridiculous, but it's actually quite comforting. It's to say, like, the grasping for the answer is the pain, and so when we get into these spaces through uh, music or nature or sex or
Hmm.
creativity, or just like letting everything else go on the shelf for a moment and just like, oh man, I'm just gonna breathe for a few minutes. That's
Yeah.
pleasurable because you're actually tapping into the truth. Everything
Yeah.
else is the facade.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're something that came to me when you were talking just there that I think folds into that little recipe nicely is that enlightenment, if you want to call it that, seems more to be an act of temporary remembering than an act of I just found it. Like I just discovered something that I didn't have before. Like in every instance that I've ever experienced it, it's like, oh yeah, oh yeah. Like it's
Yeah,
more like that kind of a feeling. And
it's the
again, that's why
mundane
I'm
usually true as well.
yeah,
You know,
it's taking the mask off of the mundane, right? To see the like
right?
vital fractal energy pulsating through it. And that again is why I am really attracted to these quote unquote rationalists, people like Plato, because a lot of his um that's what a lot of his I guess ontology or whatever was predicated upon, was this idea of anamnesis, of remembering, of innate knowledge, not acquiring knowledge you didn't have before from out there, but rediscovering it in your own psyche. And to me, that's always what it feels like. Even if like you're learning something, like for you, if you're learning like a scale or something on the piano, it feels more like the feeling of when it's right. You know the feeling of like, aha, that's what it's supposed to be. That's what it's supposed to be. And it's like this inner thing that you're clarifying versus a outer thing that you're discovering. And that to me, is a great example of something that I can't prove, or that I can't convince anybody who, if you're staunchly against this idea, I can't convince you of it. Unless, well, maybe I could with like 5 grams of mushrooms or something. Like, see, you knew
Right.
this, didn't you? You knew this somewhere deep down. But it just feels right to me. So that's the best way I can
Mm.
put it.
Well, you're talking about also what taste is, like our sense of taste, especially like we all
Hmm.
have it, like what we like and what we don't. But as an artist, anyone who's creative, I think that's really the bedrock of what's going on. Is you have this sense of taste, and as you're developing, you asked me about, like I was talking about the plateau thing, and I think the reason it didn't feel good to me when someone said that was because I have this sense of taste where I'm like, you know what? I feel like I haven't still yet created the thing that I'm wanting to create from my own sense of taste. Like
Ah, yes.
it's
Uh-huh.
still out there,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I keep getting little corners of it, but I'm like, it's not. I just know inside there's still the thing I'm trying to to
Yeah.
allow to form, and
Well,
all
we're
I can
coming
judge that by is my own taste.
we're coming back into part of a question that I think we wound up taking a different path down, which is when I asked you, do you feel like some measurement of having arrived? Do you feel some measurement of like, yes, I am, I'm not there, but at least I'm going the right way. I'm making progress. I'm going toward the thing, the bliss, the whatever that I was meant to, for lack of a better term. It, I but I also understand the idea that you haven't yet done the thing. And I think as an artist, I think you always have to feel like, no, no,
Yeah.
I haven't made the best book. I haven't made the best song. I haven't made the best painting. I think that has to remain elusive all the way through your life. But I guess the dark side of that too is this would be the Buddhist interpretation is like stop grasping for that thing because it doesn't exist. It's a thing
Hmm.
that your mind is making up and it's only going to cause you suffering. But maybe this is kind of like I often run into this east-west dichotomy where it seems like what the eastern wisdom is saying is like stop chasing, just stop it. Like that's the answer is to stop the chasing and realize that that's a trick, that's a game, that's a bug of evolution, whatever language you want to wrap around it. And the western seems to be saying like no, no, go into the forest, go try, go explore,
Taste the fruits.
go
Yes.
yeah, go fight the monster, go whatever, return with the elixir. And then maybe the overarching sad way to just like wrap all of that in a bow is I wrote this quote down the other day that I came across, which is by Yeats, and it's life is a long preparation for something that never happens. Maybe
Yeah,
that's the brutal
that's
maybe
that's
that's
a
the
good way
brutal
of
truth
summing
of
it
it.
up. Uh, yeah, man, absolutely. A lot of that resonates with me. I, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head with sort of the struggles I feel like in middle age is about stop the grasping. What would that mean? Like, what would that look like? And w- because what it feels like is I'm not meant, or none of us in a sense are meant to completely unplug. And I don't think you can. But at the same time, we're not meant to be grasping so hard to find the answer. And then it's like, okay, boom, there it is. Now I've arrived, so to speak. There's no arrival. And that's the trick. It's like, but at the same time, there does seem to be meaning and purpose to the drive, the sense of will or drive. Like, where does that come from? And is it strictly pejorative? I don't think so. But there's a balance to it where, yes, you can feel off course, where you are trying to grasp at things that the grasping sort of takes over your consciousness. So I I also struggle a lot with time. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like how much time do I have left to to do the things I want to do and to develop my skills and allow it to, like, if I feel in service to anything, it's to develop the gifts that I've been given in a reasonable way, not like
Yeah.
crazy,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
that they can express themselves with the most joy and creative ability. And that's a tough fine line because I think a lot about, unfortunately, these days. I'm looking at the back nine instead of the front nine, and
Yeah.
I'm like, how much time do I have, unfortunately, to express these things and put these things out there? As it is an act of service, but it's weird. Like, the grasping to achieve is actually helping drive me to create more, as opposed to just saying I'm done.
Yeah.
And it's got its pros and cons there. So I have more recently, and my partner's been helping me feel this in my body. Sort of like, just take a second. She'll say, like, if I'm complaining about something, and she'd be like, feel the success, or feel like what is true, what is real, and just let that exist too for a second. And I try to do that through gratitude of, like, man, I am, yeah, maybe we're bitching about the sound check for this, or they're charging me for the lighting designer I didn't know I was going to have, whatever. And I'm like, but you know what? How fucking amazing who are that these people are, if showed up and bought tickets to this show in another country, and this
Mhm.
is amazing. And if I would have been this would have been seemed impossible X number of years ago. And like, but now I'm like, oh, it needs to be, oh, but we were 15 away from selling out or whatever. It's like,
Yeah, right,
so
right,
it's
right.
really just trying to put yourself in your place, put on your
Totally, man.
humbleness hat and be like, this is amazing. Like how
Yes.
privileged it is to be able to do this, and that I was even able to have any of this happen, and how circuitous the path has been, but also how, like, if someone were to say, like, what advice would you give for people to do this? It's very difficult to give that advice because I'm like, on one level, this feels like, man, this has been so specific and strange that I just can't. I'm the luckiest guy on the earth
Right.
that I decided to start making very strange non-commercial music 15 years ago, specifically not trying to be commercial about it, and that becomes something that is in a commercial space now. Why am I grateful? Only for two reasons. One, I can do it as a living, and two, I can reach more people with it. And it seems it seems to fill a particular role that is needed, and everyone wants to feel
Mhm.
purposeful and
Mhm.
needed. All of us. So that's what I
Yeah.
feel the most grateful about. Is like that one letter I got. If like, well, if there's more of those people I don't hear from, oh my God, that makes me feel so. You feel good about yourself if you're like,
Yeah.
you're helping anybody. I mean,
Right.
helping people feels good. So I just need to
It
keep the other
does.
stuff in check and then just focus on the like giving. When you give and give and give, it comes back to you energetically, in different ways. It's the golden rule. So if I want to
Yeah.
feel infinite myself, I'm trying to help others feel infinite. I want others to connect to their own soul because I'm connecting to my soul, and it's all one thing. I'm just engendering the great peekaboo has gotten a little bit more fun.
I love it, man. I love it. I kind of want to leave it on that, but I do have one more thing I wanted to bounce off you because it just made me think of it as another way that I like to look at this because I love James Hillman so much, which is he's this other like kind of post Jungian mythopoetic psychologist. Is he has this idea of growing down, and he often talks about individuation as like becoming going from an acorn to an oak tree. So it's this idea of, an acorn can become an oak tree. Like it has all of the information inside of it to grow into a unique oak tree. And we too are the embryo of a unique potential. And you could call that unique potential destiny. I'm comfortable doing that. Some people may not be. But I like it because it gives a mythological image, it gives a notion of that weird, malleable, hard to put your finger on intuition of knowing when you're on the right path and knowing when you're not on the right path. And
Right.
knowing when you're on the right path is that you're going toward the light that makes that potential oak tree grow. And this is kind of what I was alluding to when I asked you of like, do you feel like you're becoming this thing? Do you feel like, and I think you answered my question in a really interesting way, which is like, your answer almost matters less than the feedback people are giving you. Because I think in the feedback people are giving you and how important that is to you, you're proving that you are becoming this oak tree because other people are like seeking shelter underneath what you're growing into. And I think that that's just a really nourishing, beautiful way to think about what you're doing because that this it is very egg like what you laid an egg 15 years ago with this unique idea that you had that like came out of this mysterious thing we call your psyche, and that egg or that embryo or that acorn grew into this very unique sprawling structure now that's doing something incredibly one of a kind for people in a way that if you were trying to be derivative, if you were trying to be more commercial, if you were trying to be something more easily digestible, never would have grown, right? So
Well, I tried
that's a
before, and
yeah.
yeah, it didn't grow for that reason. Like I was trying to be pandering in a sense. Like, what do people want to hear with my old project? And
Hmm.
the oak tree growing into the sun is, you have to remember, is a natural process. Like a plant
Exactly. Yeah.
leaning into the sun is natural. So I actually would say I didn't plant the egg was not my creation. It was the cosmic egg. It was more me seeing the egg and then kind of being the gardener. It's like, well, how can I help this garden grow? And it will naturally do its thing. I don't actually even know what that thing fully is, or what the fruits might taste like, or this or that. I mean, I'm inspired by things, but uh, it's an oak tree. It may be something that others find shelter underneath, but it's within a forest,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
there are many trees. And I don't delude myself to think that this one, it has its uniqueness from the individual soul, from my own expression, but as there are billions more. And that's what makes a forest so vibrant, is the diversity, the biodiversity and complexity, interdependence of it. So new things sprout up under that, on the forest floor, that wouldn't have grown without that cover. And then conversely, new species arrive that rely on others in different ways, and mother trees that have fallen and felled then create new life and composting. It's all part of this great creation. So,
And then mushrooms come out.
and the mushrooms maybe create the whole thing. I
Yeah.
mean, boy, that we could really go on a riff on that.
Yeah.
I mean, just briefly, just really thinking about that, like, what if the mushrooms are this intergalactic intelligence that quite literally and physically attach their spores on exploded planets into meteorites that hit other planets, and have the patience of billions of years to wait to see what develops. And if there is consciousness that can develop and interface with theirs, then they help that evolution occur, uh, to I mean, that's kind of, I mean, I have to, I'm just saying, for me, I had
Hmm.
inspiration from a handful of mushroom journeys with music that inspired me to try to create music for that space, purely because there's a sort of tug, this pull to say, I want to return there. I want to communicate with that. But there was something that helped me with the music. That was it. And then I did that, and here we are talking. And like, I don't understand that, but I like engendering that conversation. And I
Yeah.
I want to be in the business of, like, saying to people and myself, "Hey, I think there's more here. What's the kernel of what we're feeling or talking about? And let's get into that and walk this walk together, because
Yeah.
that's what we can do." Like, I want to be that cosmic cheerleader as much for others as I am for myself, to be like, "Hey, we can do this." Even I have many doubts too, but we can do this. And we need a lot of that these days. So,
Absolutely, my friend.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I don't think I'd be here behind this microphone without those funky little spores either. So there's something calling. And I mean, I think it's, I think it's right in the word psychedelic. I think it's just this this structure, this little veneer of the ego or the persona that's holding back the tide of psyche. It's not very thick. It's
Right.
it's when you change the molecules, you throw a little alkaloid in there, and kablamo, it comes blasting out, and you remember so much. And it's vitally, I think, important that people are able to access that experience, and able to have a constructive experience. So again, I return to what you are doing as such a hugely beneficial and valuable example of how to condition that experience. So it's why one of the many reasons I love rapping with you. Um, Thank you for doing this again. And if you have any final musings, let them loose.
Not really. I mean, look, I don't think just so people know, like, I don't want them to feel like there's a club of psychedelic, like it's that or nothing. It isn't.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the same time, like, there are many ways to roam. There really are. And I think it does happen when you can be washing the dishes, or certainly like petting a dog or a cat, and you have that oxytocin boost in each of you. I mean, that's it too. But there can be those powerful moments. And I ran into this guy at a hot spring couple days ago, and outside in Idaho, and he comes up to me and he's like, "Hey," he's like, "Are you East Forest?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man." And he's like, "I'm a big fan, yada yada." And we got to talking, and I said, "My partner here is a ketamine therapist in town. If you're ever looking for that kind of work." And he's like, "Oh, I've actually never really dove into that kind of space." And I said, like, "Have you ever done that with my music?" He's like, "Well, kind of, blah blah blah." And I was like, "Dude, if you're a fan and you do dabble in that space," I said, I encourage you to take what the medicine as you see fit, create a really safe and proper container for it, where you really give your space time to listen, and listen to music for mushrooms, the 5 hours. And then I feel like we've gotten to know each other probably a lot better than even this conversation. And
Yeah.
on one level, I know that I've got people who they maybe listen to, even friends of mine, like listen to the music here and there, and they liked it. And then one day they gave the space to listen in that space, in the psychedelic space, with one of those intentional pieces like that. And they feel like I didn't, I said, now they're like, I feel like now I kind of get it. I didn't really get it as much,
Hmm.
or I thought I did, but now I'm like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, there's off-label uses and on-label uses for the
Yeah.
music, and they're
Yeah.
both okay. Um, but there's something that spoke to me in that space, and if people feel that's safe and legal for them, it's like I say, these tools are out there, and I'm just interested in helping people like get in touch with that expansiveness that is
Yeah.
so infinitely expansive, because it's like, man, what a shame not to feel that. And other people already have felt that in different ways in their lives. That's beautiful. But for some of us, for
Yeah.
me, I was a tough nut to crack. So,
Yes.
and I think these days we need those tools and those experiences to kind of help us remember, as you're saying, and be like, okay, there's some bigger things, and I'm part of that, and I can sing my note in this chorus, and that is important. And I don't have to be as like inundated with the bad news to just feel like it's pointless, or because we all feel that these days. Uh, and we need to encourage one another and remind each other, to help remind ourselves that anything's possible. There's infinite possibilities. That's just a fact.
Yes.
Hmm.
Well said, my friend. Well said. And thank you too for the legal disclaimer, because I would never condone doing anything illegal, though I would condone even less the creation of a law that puts your consciousness as on a leash that some master is pulling on.
Cognitive liberty. Yes. I mean, it's almost like we have it. So it's like, it's kind of absurd to think that we're not supposed to be able to think about certain things or expand our minds, which you can do with your breath. But it's like,
Yeah.
but absolutely, I'm definitely supporting people to do things that are safe. And I don't want people breaking laws. But I just want them to feel love and to do what feels right for them. I mean, ultimately, it's up to people. We're not here giving any prescriptive advice on that level, certainly not medically, because I don't
Yes.
know I don't know any people, what they're listening or what they're thinking or who they are or where they are. It's like, these are just ideas for inspiration. They're metaphor. It's myth.